It's time for Krishna book. Summary study of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And this is Krishna book, volume 2, chapter 32, prayers by the Personified Vedas. And this is chapter 11, part 11. It's a very long chapter, and I had it marked, and now I just lost the mark. So I have to try and find the place again. This could take a couple minutes. Oh, wow, found it right away. Okay. So at the time of when it's time for the material world to be manifested again, periodically the material universes are unmanifest and then manifest. All the ingredients for the material world and all the living entities also are drawn into the body of the Supreme Lord. And then they stay there in a dormant state until it's time for them to manifest again, and then the ingredients come out, and so are the living entities. So at that time, when the Lord is in his mystic slumber of Yoga Nidra, he's lying on the causal ocean, sleeping, the Vedas personified offer these prayers. So these are the prayers that they offer. And we're continuing on here. This is part 11. The theory of the Asuras is that the living entities are born of material nature, or Prakriti, in touch with the Purusha. This theory also cannot be accepted because both the material nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because the material nature and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are eternally existing. Neither the material nature nor the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be born. The Supreme Lord is known as Aja, or unborn. Similarly, the material nature is also called Aja. Both the terms Aja and Aja mean unborn. Because both the material nature and the Supreme Lord are unborn, it is not possible that they can beget the living entities. As water in contact with air sometimes presents innumerable bubbles, so a combination of material nature and the Supreme Person causes the appearance of the living entities within this material world. As bubbles in the water appear in different shapes, similarly the living entities also appear in the material world in different shapes and conditions, influenced by the modes of material nature. As such, it's not improper to conclude that the living entities appearing within this material world in different shapes, such as human beings, demigods, animals, birds, beasts, etc., all get their respective bodies due to different desires. No one can say when such desires were awakened in them, and therefore it is said anadi karma. The cause of such material existence is untraceable. No one knows when material life began, but it is a fact that it does have a point of beginning, because originally every living entity is a spiritual spark. As spiritual sparks falling onto the ground, from a fire have a beginning, similarly the living entity coming to this material world have a beginning, but no one can say when. Even during the time of dissolution, these living entities remain merged in the spiritual existence of the Lord as if in deep sleep. But their original desires to lord it over the material nature do not subside. Again, when there is cosmic manifestation, they come out to fulfill the same desires, and therefore they appear in different species of life. This merging into the Supreme at the time of dissolution is compared to honey. In the honeycomb, the tastes of different flowers and fruits are conserved. When one drinks honey, one cannot distinguish what sort of honey has been collected from what sort of flower, but the palatable taste of the honey presupposes that the honey is not homogeneous, but is a combination of different tastes. Another example is that although different rivers ultimately mix with the water of the sea, that does not mean that the individual entities of the rivers are thereby lost. Although the water of the Ganges and the Yamuna mixes with the water of the sea, the rivers, Ganges and Yamuna, still continue to exist independently. The merging of different living entities into Brahman at the time of dissolution involves the dissolution of different types of bodies, but the living entities, along with their different tastes, remain individually submerged in Brahman until another manifestation of the material world. As the salty taste of seawater and the sweet taste of Ganges water are different, in that this difference continuously exists, so the difference between the Supreme Lord and the living entities continually exists, even though it appears that at the time of dissolution they merge. The conclusion is, therefore, that even when the living entities become free from all contamination of material conditions, they merge into the spiritual kingdom, for still their individual tastes in relationship with the Supreme Lord continue to exist. The personified Vedas continued. Our dear Lord, it is our conclusion that all living entities are attracted by your material energy, and only due to their mistakenly identifying themselves as products of the material nature are they transmigrating from one kind of body to another in forgetfulness of their eternal relationship with you. Because of ignorance, these living entities are misidentifying themselves in different species of life, and especially when they're elevated to the human form of life, they identify with a particular class of men, or a particular nation or race or so-called religion, forgetting their real identity as eternal servants of your Lordship. Due to this faulty conception of life, they're undergoing repeated birth and death. Out of many millions of them, if one becomes intelligent enough to associate with pure devotees, he comes to the understanding of Krishna consciousness and comes out of the jurisdiction of the material misconception. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita it is confirmed that Lord Chaitanya, that the living entities are wandering within this universe in different species of life. But if one of them becomes intelligent enough, by the mercy of the spiritual master and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and he begins his devotional life in Krishna consciousness. It is said, Harim Vina Namritim Taranti. Without the help of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot get out of the clutches of repeated birth and death. In other words, only the Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, can relieve the conditioned souls from the cycle of repeated birth and death. Personified Vedas continued. The influence of time, past, present, and future, and the material miseries such as excessive heat, excessive cold, birth, death, old age, disease, are all simply the movement of your eyebrows. Everything is working under your direction. It is said in Bhagavad-gītā that all material activity is going on under the direction of a Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. All the conditions of material existence are opposing elements for persons who are not surrendered unto you. But for those who are surrendered souls and are in full Krishna consciousness, these things cannot be a source of fearfulness. But for those, yes. When Lord Nrsingadev appeared, Prahlad Maharaj was never afraid of him, whereas his atheist father was immediately faced with death personified and was killed. Therefore, although Lord Nrsingadev appears as death for an atheist like Hiranyakashipu, he's always kind and is the reservoir of all pleasure to devotees like Prahlad. pure devotee is not, therefore, afraid of birth, death, old age, and disease. Sripad Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse, the purport of which is as follows. My dear Lord, I'm a living entity perpetually disturbed by the conditions of material existence. I have been cracked into different pieces by the smashing wheel of material existence because of my various sinful activities while existing in this material world. I'm burning in the blazing fire of material reaction. Somehow or other, my Lord, I've come to take shelter under your lotus feet. Please accept me and give me protection. Srila Narottam Das Thakur also prays like this. My dear Lord, O son of Nanda Maharaj, associated with the daughter of Vrishabhanu, I've come to take shelter under your lotus feet after suffering greatly in the material condition of life, and I pray that you please be merciful upon me. Please do not kick me away. I have no other shelter than you. The conclusion is that any process of self-realization or God-realization other than bhakti yoga or devotional service is extremely difficult. Taking shelter of devotional service to the Lord in full Krishna consciousness is therefore the only way to become free from the contamination of material conditional life, especially in this age. Those who are not in Krishna consciousness are simply wasting their time, and they have no tangible proof of spiritual life. It's said by Lord Ramachandra, I always give confidence and security to anyone who surrenders unto me and decides definitely he's my eternal servant, because that is my natural inclination. Similarly, Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad-gītā, the influence of the material nature is insurmountable, but anyone who surrenders unto me can verily overcome the influence of material nature. The devotees are not at all interested in arguing with the non-devotees to nullify their theories. Rather than wasting their time, they're always engaged themselves in transcendental loving service of the Lord in full Krishna consciousness. The Personified Vedas continued. Our dear Lord, although great mystic yogis may have full control over the elephant of the mind and the hurricane of the senses, unless they take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, they fall victim to the material influence and never become successful in their attempts at self-realization. Such unguided persons are compared to merchants going to sea on a ship without a captain. By his personal attempts, therefore, no one can get free from the clutches of material nature. One has to accept a bona fide spiritual master and work according to his direction. Then it is possible to cross over the ocean of nescience of material conditions. Sripad Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse in this connection in which he says, O all-merciful spiritual master, representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when will my mind be completely surrendered unto your lotus feet? At that time, only by your mercy, I shall be able to get relief from all obstacles to spiritual life, and I shall be situated in blissful life. Actually, ecstatic samadhi, or absorption in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, can be achieved by constant engagement in His service. This constant engagement in devotional service can be performed only when one is working under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. The Vedas therefore instruct that in order to know the science of devotional service, one has to submit himself unto the bona fide spiritual master. The bona fide spiritual master is he who knows the science of devotional service in disciplic succession. This disciplic succession is called Shrotriyam. The prime symptom of one who has become a spiritual master in disciplic succession is that he is 100% fixed in bhakti yoga. Sometimes people neglect to accept a spiritual master, and instead they endeavor for self-realization by mystic yoga practice. But there are many instances of failure, even by great yogis like Vishvamitra. Arjuna said in Bhagavad-gītā that controlling the mind is as impractical as stopping the blowing of a wind. Sometimes the mind is compared to a maddened elephant. Without following the direction of a spiritual master, one cannot control the mind and the senses. In other words, if one practices yoga mysticism, does not accept a bona fide spiritual master, he will surely fail. He will simply waste his valuable time. The Vedic injunction is, no one can have full knowledge without being under the guidance of an acharya. Acharyavan Purusho Veda. One who has accepted an acharya knows what is what. The absolute truth cannot be understood by arguments. One who has attained the perfect Brahminical stage naturally becomes renounced. He does not strive for material gain, because by spiritual knowledge he has come to the conclusion that in this world there is no insufficiency. Everything is sufficiently provided by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A real Brahmin, therefore, does not endeavor for material perfection. Rather, he approaches a bona fide spiritual master to accept orders from him. A spiritual master's qualification is that he is Brahmanistam, which means that he has given up all other activities and has dedicated his life to working only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. When a bona fide student approaches a bona fide spiritual master, he submissively prays to the spiritual master, "My dear Lord, kindly accept me as your student. Train me in such a way I'll be able to give up all other kinds of processes for self-realization and simply engage in Krishna consciousness, devotional service." The devotee, engaged by the direction of the spiritual master in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, contemplates as follows. "My dear Lord, you are the reservoir of pleasure. Since you are present, what is the use of transient pleasure derived from society, friendship, and love? Persons who are unaware of the supreme reservoir of pleasure falsely engage in deriving pleasure from sense gratification, but this is transient and illusory." In this connection, Vidyapati, a great Vaishnava devotee and poet, says, "My dear Lord, undoubtedly there is some pleasure in the midst of society, friendship, and love, although it is materially conceived, but such pleasure cannot satisfy my heart, which is like a desert. In a desert, there is a need of an ocean of water, but if only a drop of water is poured on the desert, what is the value of such water? Similarly, our material hearts are full of multi-desires, which cannot be fulfilled within the material society of friendship and love. When our hearts begin to derive pleasure from the supreme reservoir of pleasure, then we can be satisfied. That transcendental satisfaction is only possible in devotional service in full Krishna consciousness." Personified Vedas continued. Our dear Lord, you are Sat-Chit Ananda Vigraha, the ever blissful form of knowledge, and because the living entities are parts and parcels of your personality, their natural state of existence is to be fully conscious of you. In this material world, anyone who has developed such Krishna consciousness is no longer interested in materialistic way of life. A Krishna conscious being becomes disinterested in family life or opulent living conditions, and he requires only a little concession for his bodily needs. In other words, he's no longer interested in sense gratification. The perfection of human life is based on knowledge and renunciation, but it's very difficult to attempt to reach the stage of knowledge and renunciation while in family life. Krishna-conscious persons therefore take shelter of the association of devotees or sanctified places of pilgrimage. Such persons are aware of the relationship between the Supersoul and the individual living entities, and they are never in the bodily concept of life, because they always carry you in full consciousness within their hearts. They're so purified that any place they go becomes a place of pilgrimage, and the water which washes their feet is able to deliver many sinful persons hovering within this material world. When Prahlad Maharaj was asked by his atheistic father to describe something very good which he had learned, he replied to his father that for a materialistic person who is always full of anxieties due to being engaged in temporary and relative truths, the best course is to give up the blind well of family life, go to the forest to take shelter of the Supreme Lord. Those who are actually pure devotees are celebrated as Mahatmas or great sages, personalities perfect in knowledge. They always think of the Supreme Lord and his lotus feet, and thus they become automatically liberated. Devotees who are always situated in that position become electrified by the inconceivable potencies of the Lord, and thus they themselves become the source of liberation for their followers and devotees. A Krishna-conscious person is fully electrified spiritually, and therefore anyone who touches or takes shelter of such a pure devotee becomes similarly electrified with spiritual potencies. Such devotees are never puffed up with material opulences. Generally, the material opulences are good parentage, education, beauty, and riches. But although a devotee of the Lord may possess all four of these material opulences, he's never carried away by the pride of possessing such distinctions. Great devotees of the Lord travel all over the world from one place of pilgrimage to another, and on their way they meet many conditioned souls and deliver them by their association and distribution of transcendental knowledge. They reside in places like Vrindavan, Mathura, Dwarka, Jagannath Puri, and Navadvip, because only devotees assemble in such places. In this way they take advantage of saintly association, and by such association the devotees advance more and more in Krishna consciousness. Such advancement is not possible in ordinary household life, which is devoid of Krishna consciousness. The Personified Vedas continued. Our dear Lord, there are two classes of transcendentalists, the impersonalists and the personalists. The opinion of the impersonalist is this material manifestation is false, and only the absolute truth is factual. The view of the personalist, however, is that the material world, although very temporary, is nevertheless not false, but is factual. Such transcendentalists have different arguments to establish the validity of their philosophies. Factually, the material world is simultaneously both true and untrue. It is truth and untruth. It's truth because everything is an expansion of the supreme absolute truth, and it's untruth because the existence of the material world is temporary. It's created and it's annihilated. Because of its different conditions of existence, the cosmic manifestation has no fixed position. Those who advocate acceptance of the material world as false are generally known by the maxim Brahma Satya Jagamicca. They put forward the argument that everything in the material world is prepared from matter. For example, there are many things made of clay, such as earthen pots, dishes, and balls. After their annihilation, these things may become transformed into many other material objects, but in all cases their existence as clay continues. An earthen water jug, after being broken, may be transformed into a bowl or dish, but either as a dish, bowl, or water jug, the earth itself continues to exist. Therefore, the forms of a water jug, bowl, or dish are false, but their existence as earth is real. This is the impersonalist version. This cosmic manifestation is certainly produced from the absolute truth, but because its existence is temporary, it is therefore false. The impersonalist understanding is that the absolute truth, which is always present, is the only truth. In the opinion of other transcendentalists, however, this material world, being produced of the absolute truth, is also truth. The impersonalist counter-argument is, material world is not factual because sometimes it is found that matter is produced from spirit soul, and sometimes spirit soul is produced from matter. Such philosophers push forward the argument that although cow dung is dead matter, sometimes it is found that scorpions come out of cow dung. Similarly, dead matter, like nails and hair, comes out of the living body. Therefore, things produced of a certain thing are not always the same. On the strength of this argument, Mayavadi philosophers establish that although this cosmic manifestation is certainly an emanation from the absolute truth, the cosmic manifestation does not necessarily have truth in it. According to this view, the absolute truth, Brahman, should therefore be accepted as truth, whereas the cosmic manifestation, although a product of the absolute truth, cannot be taken as truth. The view of the Mayavadi philosopher, however, is stated in the Bhagavad-gītā to be the view of the Asuras or the demons. The Lord says in Bhagavad-gītā, Asatyam apratishtam te jagat ahar anivshvaram. The Asura's view of this cosmic manifestation is the whole creation is false. The Asuras think that the mere interaction of matter is the source of the creation, and there's no controller or God, but actually that's not the fact. From the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā we understand that the 5 gross elements, earth, water, air, fire, and sky, plus the subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and false ego, are the 8 separated energies of the Supreme Lord. Beyond this inferior material energy, there is a spiritual energy which is known as the living entities. The living entities are also accepted as the superior energy of the Lord. The whole cosmic manifestation is a combination of the inferior and superior energies, and the source of the energies is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has many different types of energies. That is confirmed in the Vedas, Parasya Shaktir Vivadhaya Shruyate. The transcendental energies of the Lord are variegated, and because such varieties have emanated from the Supreme Lord, they cannot be false. The Lord is ever-existing, and the energies are ever-existing. Some of the energy is temporary, sometimes manifested and sometimes unmanifested, but that does not mean that it is false. The example may be given that when a person is angry, he does things which are different from his normal condition of life, but that the mood of anger only appears and disappears does not mean that the energy of anger is false. As such, the argument of the Mayavadi philosophers that this world is false is not accepted by the Vaishnava philosophers. It's confirmed by the Lord himself that the view that there is no supreme cause of this material manifestation, that there is no God, and everything is only the creation of the interaction of matter, is a view of the Asuras. The Mayavadi philosopher sometimes puts forward the argument of the snake and the rope. In the dark of evening, a curled-up rope is sometimes, due to ignorance, taken for a snake. But mistaking the rope as a snake does not mean that the rope or the snake is false. Therefore, this example used by the Mayavadis to illustrate the falsity of the material world is not valid. When a thing is taken as fact, but actually has no existence at all, it's called false. But if something is mistaken for something else, it does not mean that it is false. The Vaishnava philosophers use this very appropriate example, comparing this material world to an earthen pot. When we see an earthen pot, it does not at once disappear and turn into something else. It may be temporary, but the earthen pot is taken into use for bringing water, and we continue to see it as an earthen pot. Therefore, although the earthen pot is temporary and is different from the original earth, still we cannot say it is false. We should therefore conclude that the entire earth and the earthen pot are both truths, because one is the product of the other. We understand from Bhagavad-gītā that after the dissolution of this cosmic manifestation, the energy enters into the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Supreme Personality of Godhead is ever-existing with his varied energies. Because the material creation is an emanation from him, we cannot say that this cosmic manifestation is a product of something void. Krishna is not void. When we speak of Krishna, he's present with his form, quality, name, entourage, and paraphernalia. Krishna is not impersonal. The original cause of everything is neither void nor impersonal, but is the Supreme Person. Demons may say that this material creation is an Ishvara without a controller or God, but such arguments ultimately cannot stand. The example given by the Mayavadi philosophers that inanimate matter like nails and hairs come out from the living body is not a very sound argument. Nails and hair are undoubtedly inanimate, but they come not from the animate living being, but from the inanimate material body. Similarly, the argument that the scorpion comes from cow dung, meaning that the living entity comes from matter, is also not sound. The scorpion which comes out of the cow dung is certainly a living entity, but the living entity does not come out of the cow dung. Only the living entity's material body, or the body of the scorpion, comes out of the cow dung. The sparks of the living entity, as we understand them from Bhagavad-gītā, are impregnated with immaterial nature, and then they come out. The body of the living entity is different forms, is supplied by material nature, but the living entity himself is begotten by the Supreme Lord. The father and the mother give the body which is necessary for the living entity under certain conditions. The living entity transmigrates from one body to another according to his different desires. The desires in the subtle form of intelligence, mind, and false ego accompany the living entity from body to body, and by superior arrangement a living entity is put into the womb of a certain type of material body, and then he develops a similar body. Therefore the spirit soul is not produced from matter, but it takes on a particular type of body under superior arrangement. To our present experience, this material world is a combination of matter and spirit. The spirit is moving the matter. The spirit soul, the living entity, and matter are different energies of the Supreme Lord. Since both energies are products of the Supreme Eternal, or the Supreme Truth, they're therefore factual. They're not false. Because the living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme, he is existing eternally. Therefore there cannot be any question of birth or death. So-called birth and death occur because of the material body. The Vedic version, Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma, means that since both the energies have emanated from the Supreme Brahman, everything that we experience is not different from Brahman. There are many arguments about the existence of this material world, but the Vaishnava philosophical conclusion is the best. The example of the earthen pot is very suitable. The form of the earthen pot may be temporary, but it has a specific purpose. The purpose of the earthen pot is to carry water from one place to another. Similarly, this material body, although temporary, has a special use. The living entity is given a chance from the beginning of the creation to evolve different types of material bodies according to the reserved desires he has accumulated from time immemorial. The human form of body is a special chance in which the developed form of consciousness can be utilized. Sometimes the Mayavadi philosophers push forward the argument that if this material world is true, then why are householders advised to give up their connection with the material world and take sannyas? But the Vaishnava philosopher's view of sannyas is not that because the world is false, one must therefore give up material activities. The purpose of Vaishnava sannyas is to utilize things as they're intended. Srila Rupa Goswami has given two formulas for our dealing with this material world. When a Vaishnava renounces this materialistic way of life and takes to sannyas, it is not on the conception of the falsity of the material world, but to devote himself fully to engaging everything in the service of the Lord. Srila Rupa Goswami therefore gives this formula. One should be unattached to the material world because material attachment is meaningless. The entire material world, the entire cosmic manifestation, belongs to God, Krishna. Therefore, everything should be utilized for Krishna. The devotee should remain unattached to material things. This is the purpose of Vaishnava sannyas. And a materialist sticks to the world for sense gratification. But a Vaishnava sannyasi, although not accepting anything for his personal sense gratification, knows the art of utilizing everything for the service of the Lord. Srila Rupa Goswami has therefore criticized the Mayavadi sannyasis because they do not know that everything has a utilization for the service of the Lord. On the contrary, they take the world to be false, and thus falsely think of being liberated from the contamination of the material world. Since everything is an expansion of the energy of the Supreme Lord, the expansions are as real as the Supreme Lord is. That the cosmic world is only a temporary manifestation does not mean that it is false, or that the source of its manifestation is false. Since the source of its manifestation is truth, the manifestation is also truth, but one must know how to utilize it. The same example can be cited. The temporary earthen body is produced from the whole earth, but when it is utilized for a proper purpose, the earthen pot is not false. Vaishnava philosophers know how to utilize the temporary construction of this material world, just as a sane man knows how to utilize the temporary construction of the earthen pot. When the earthen pot is utilized for a wrong purpose, that is false. Similarly, this human form of body, or this material world, when utilized for false sense gratification, is false. But if this human form of body and the material creation are utilized for the service of the Supreme Lord, their activities are never false. It's therefore confirmed in the Bhagavad-gītā that a little service attitude in utilizing this body and the material world for the service of the Lord can deliver a person from the gravest danger of life. When they're properly utilized, neither the superior nor inferior energies emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead are false. As far as fruitive activities are concerned, they're mainly based on the platform of sense gratification. Therefore, an advanced Krishna conscious person does not take to them. The result of fruitive activities can elevate one to the higher planetary system, but as it is said in Bhagavad-gītā, foolish persons, after exhausting the results of their pious activities in the heavenly kingdom, come back again to this lower planetary system, and then again try to go to the higher planetary system. Their only profit is to take the trouble of going and coming back, just as at present many material scientists are spoiling their time by trying to go to the moon planet and again coming back. Those who are engaged in such activities are described by the Vedas personified as Andha Parampara, or blind followers of the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. Although such ceremonies are certainly mentioned in the Vedas, they're not meant for the intelligent class of men. Men who are too much attached to material enjoyment are captivated by the prospect of being elevated to the higher planetary systems, and so they take to such ritualistic activities. But a person who is intelligent, or has taken shelter of a bona fide spiritual master to see things as they are, does not take to fruitive activities, but engages himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Hare Krishna.